Hey guys, I had an idea that I wanted to present in the INTP stream that I had a while back, and at the time it was a much larger statement. Now it's a much more limited. No, now it's a much more limited statement, and because it's a little bit less general and more limited, uh, it may be more digestible and more sensible. Therefore, it's the idea that in the development of government in human society. It's very natural. It's a very natural progression. There's a very natural progression, and I'm not necessarily a historical progressionist uh, with regard to all periods of history and with regard to all forms of human development. But when it comes from the transition from a stateless society to a monarchical society, as it was in Europe, specifically in the British Empire, I think that there's a very natural progression that occurs in political philosophy looking at the development of states from anarchy giving way to monarchy very readily for one key reason. Sorry, the dog is barking a little. In a uh, stateless society, in an anarchic society, what are there associations in such a society? Yes, there is one, to my mind, one very particular kind of association in an anarchic society. And those associations are families. In an anarchical world, there are still certain types of associations. And the primary kind of association that exists in an anarchical world is our families. Families are kinds of associations. And so in an anarchical society, you basically have associations still, they're just family associations rather than a social compact which binds all families together into one coherent code of ethics and law. In this sense, it would make sense for anarchy, for a stateless society, to give way readily to a monarchy. Because in an anarchical society, the fundamental units of association are families. It would make sense then when an anarchic or stateless society attempts to form a social compact and a government, that it would simply vest authority, executive authority, in one of these families, right? In the case of a hereditary monarchy, you could vest authority in one family, one of these family associations that existed in the stateless society, and through a process of hereditary rule, vest in that family the power of executive decision making, which is inherited down generations of family lines through the lineage. So, in this sense, if all that we know in an anarchic or stateless society are families as the fundamental units of association, fundamental association groups, it would make sense for anarchy to give way to monarchy very readily, because then people would simply recognize, well, why don't we just look at one of these families that compose the whole of society and vest in that family the power of hereditary rule. We'll leave it to that particular family to govern us all, right? So, coming from an anarchic or stateless society position, all that we know about association is that it's distributed within families and that the whole society is broken up into the families as the fundamental units of association between persons. Why not, in moving from anarchy to monarchy, simply vest in one of these families, one of these very powerful families that existed in the stateless or anarchic society? Why don't we simply vest authority in one of those families, right? It was the only kind of association we knew in an anarchic society are the families. So why not vest in one family the power of hereditary rule? Hence, anarchy could very easily give way to hereditary monarchy. And at least in the case of the British Empire, if my history is correct, which it may not be, this is probably precisely what happened. I'm not exactly sure how political philosophers and historians view the development of monarchy in the British Empire and in European history. But there's definitely some natural logic to the idea that anarchy can very easily give way to monarchy, because all that we knew in a stateless society where families is the fundamental units of associations of persons, why not simply vest in one of these families the power of hereditary rule? In this sense, anarchy can very easily give way to monarchy. And this is probably precisely what happened to the British Empire. We'll simply vest the power of hereditary rule in one of these families, families being the only form of association that we knew of. So I think that it's very natural, looking at this through the lens of a kind of historical progressionism and the development of government in human society, that anarchy can very easily give way to monarchy. And then monarchy gives way to, well, it could give way to democracy, it could give way to constitutional monarchy, it could give way to elective monarchy, it could give way to another kind of executive-focused government, it could give way to purely representative government, depending on how violent the rebellion is against the monarchy. And it's only to say that though historical progressionism is perhaps not, the idea of historical progressionism is perhaps not valid in every case with regard to the development of government, it's only to say that it's very natural for humans to move from anarchy to monarchy, if we view both as primitive states of government, and we view that democracy as some kind of democracies or republics, representative democracies or representative republics, are some kind of ideal, which they are not. They're not necessarily an ideal. Democracy isn't necessarily an ideal. Socrates, I know, was against democracy, and there are very good reasons to be against your classical representative democracy, because it is a very inefficient system. And sure, power is limited in some way by a constitution or by a government of separated powers, but it's much harder to construct such a state than it is to simply vest authority in one monarch, in one executive decision maker who simply decides, the ways of the state, the policies of the state, the overtures of the state by him or herself. In the case of kings, by himself. In the case of queens, by herself. So it's only to state that with regard to anarchy and monarchy, there may be some historical progressionist link between the two, because it's simply natural in terms of the development of human thought, human political thought, that we would very readily move from conceive of monarchy as the next logical step after anarchy when we decide to form a social compact. So I don't know, maybe one or two political philosophers will see this video, or a historian, an expert on European history or British history, political history, would see this and shoot down this idea, and I'm fully welcoming that, to be honest with you. Because I may be wrong on my history, but at least with respect to my logic, I think this may be valid. So I may be wrong on my history, but regardless, the logic may be sound. So I encourage you to think about that, and maybe in another video, I'll get into the limitations, the dangers of democracy. There's recognized danger in a direct democracy, which is why few of them even exist anymore. Those simply become too inefficient for a large population society. But certainly representative democracy is better. It's just still a lot more slow, cantankerous, and inefficient than pure executive leadership. And we do want the executive to be limited, of course, but we have to remember that oftentimes, whether or not we would regard monarchy as a dangerous thing, there are always self-correcting mechanisms in a society that may lead even a theoretically bad form of government in a good direction, and thereby make it a good form of government within the specific cultural and local context. So I'm not a monarchist, but I can see the logic for monarchy in history as the next logical step in the development of government, of human society and government. I can see monarchy very, very naturally arising anthropologically and logically from anarchy by the reasoning that I've tried to provide here. Hopefully it's coherent. So in any case, yeah, thank you for watching.